Mr. Subramanian, thank you so much for your time here in Davos. It seems to me, at least, over the last several years that I've been covering the WEF's annual meeting, that this is a much more dismal Davos than I've experienced in the last few years, especially since the global financial crisis. What's the sense you're picking up about the global economy here?
Well, I can't do a relative comparison. I can't compare with previous years. And I think, I'm sure there have been more dismal years before, especially in the aftermath of Lehman and even before. I think, because remember, this year, it's not that it's uniformly glum and grim, because for one thing, the US has rebounded back very strongly. I think that's a plus sign for the world economy. And about Japan also, there is a sense that, for a couple of reasons, the mood is not bleak on Japan, because Prime Minister Abe is a strong leader. He's planning this QE. He's postponed the consumption tax, the second bit. And oil prices are, just like for India, they're very good for the Japanese economy. It's like a tax cut for Japanese consumers and so on. So Japan is not looking, that bleak. I think the really weak spot in the world economy is Europe. And of course, a slowing China. And of course, we should always, view China in a different light, because it's slowing down at 7.4%. So, just to place that in context. So I would say that, yes, things are gloom, but it's not uniformly gloom. There are pockets of brightness. Everything has a plus and a minus. US is growing very rapidly, but the pattern of growth in the US is a cause for worry, because the gains are not being shared at all across the spectrum. It's being concentrated at the very top. So pluses and minuses. But the interesting thing, of course, that India does stand out in this as a kind of beacon of dynamism and hope in this context.
In fact, the sluggish growth across the world, and I'm not saying the US is not an engine of growth, so to speak, but even it is not doing great quality of growth, puts more pressure on India to be able to get its act together. Also puts pressure on India in other ways. For instance, the currency volatility we're likely to see with regards to what's gone on with the euro, the ECB decision tomorrow, that is Thursday, the Swiss National Bank decision from last week, what that means for the rupee vis-a-vis big trading partners like the Eurozone. How are you assessing all of this?
You see, I think that, to answer your question about does this put pressure on us, I think our pressures need to be and are totally internal. The fact that we have to generate, 7-8% growth, we have to generate employment opportunities for everyone. I think that's our pressure, and the question only is whether the external environment is going to be less favorable, more favorable to us. And there, the external environment, firstly in terms of oil prices, has been very favorable to us. That's good for us. US growing rapidly is also good for us, because a lot of our services exports go to the United States. So that's good for us. And of course, the question there is, how are international financial markets and any monetary policy decisions, how they're going to affect us? And I would say that if, for example, the US at some point is going to revert to normal monetary policy, which is code for saying that interest rates will go up for the first time in many years, will that be as volatile and disruptive as, say, what happened last year? And surely the answer has to be that, this time around, we're much more resilient. I mean, the Indian economy, compare the Indian economy today to, July and August of 2013, inflation is half what it used to be. The current account deficit even less than half what it used to be. Growth has, my own sense is that the growth deceleration has bottomed out, and there are positive impulses to growth going forward. First from the fact that oil prices is going to put more purchasing power in consumers and in the pockets of firms as well, and the fact that inflation is coming down also opens up scope for more support from the monetary policy side as well. So all these are kind of well lined up for India. I think the big question is how we revive investment, both private and public, because that's what's going to give us durable growth of 7-8%, which is India's medium-term potential.
And that's not a one-year exercise.
Yeah, it's not a one-year exercise. It's an ongoing, it's an ongoing, continuous process. We need to do the reforms. We need to, increase public investment and just get the investment back again, in the real investment back in the Indian economy.
Are you concerned right now about where the rupee is? There's no reason for concern.
Yeah.
In fact, we've seen a degree of strength in the rupee, but there, vis-a-vis the euro, let's say, for instance, that has seen a big fall in the last few weeks. We are, in fact, a little less competitive than many of our competitors, so to speak. So I'm just looking at the rupee on both sides. You don't want extreme volatility, and you don't want too much appreciation either.
Yeah, at the moment, I don't think the rupee is a big cause of concern. I think. It's been around 60, 61, and if other countries' currencies, competitor countries, does depreciate, of course, it's going to impact our competitiveness. But then, we have to respond by making our economy competitive and, doing all that we can internally to regain our competitiveness. What other countries do is something we have to take as given, because we can't change that very much.
Do you have a comfort level for the rupee in mind when you do your spreadsheet work?
No, I think that's something that the RBI is doing a good job of handling. So
okay, fair enough. There's been one sticky issue with regards to the beneficial impact of the lower crude oil prices, which is that the government hasn't allowed for the full benefit to pass through to the consumer because of the repetitive excise hikes that we've seen. Now, I get that we need to reach that fiscal deficit commitment. Tax revenue growth has been very slow, but is this a suitable short-term fix as opposed to the medium-term gains of allowing for the full benefits to pass to consumers?
You see, remember that just from a kind of analytical point of view, that any decrease in a price in a commodity like this, you generally want to share the gains between consumers and the government, because in some ways the government is like a shock absorber, because remember, we're not entirely sure whether this is going to be permanent, it's going to come back, so we don't want too much volatility as well, right? So I think that's why we need to, and also the second thing is that we also need to look at petroleum taxation, independently. We had brought it down to very low levels, and now we have, as you said, this fiscal deficit issue which we need to address, and it also is an objective matter of how much petroleum, which is after all a sin good because of the environmental consequences, the congestion consequences that come from taxing petroleum. So you want to reflect that as well in so how you should share the kind of gains from declines in international prices. It's a bit more complicated, because as I said, some consumers have benefited, and it has come down, not by as much as
not to the full extent.
Yeah, not to the full extent.
And if you deregulate a sector, then one would think that you would deregulate it altogether. Using tax as a way of controlling prices seems,
See, but,
interesting, if I may say so. And maybe not passing on the full benefits to the consumer, I'm not sure I fully understand the reason behind that. Hence, I'm asking.
Well, I mean, we do have a fiscal deficit, target which we have to meet. And, I do think that, if you were to do the counterfactual, right? You pass everything on the consumer. Say the price goes back up again.
The consumer bears it.
The consumer will bear it, but
I thought that's what deregulation is.
No, it's true that's what deregulation is about. But we do also have a fiscal imperative which we want to. So remember, deregulation is about the oil companies deciding what they want to do, and that's
deregulation is about meeting global market prices of crude, right?
And that's a decision for the oil market companies to take.
But if the government intervenes with the tax, then you're really actually not allowing for the full benefits of deregulation. I won't labor the point, but I was just curious because the same very commitment to a fiscal deficit target could have been met with a slightly more aggressive disinvestment agenda. Unfortunately, that hasn't come through. And, several companies that have been in the pipeline for some time now, we're still waiting for word on them. So I'm just curious as to why you all chose the excise on fuel goods route as opposed to the disinvestment route which has been chalked out at the beginning of the fiscal.
Yeah, I think the government has to use all possible policy levers that it has. It's not one or the other. You try and do all that you can and as quickly as you can, and taking account of all the constraints. So I think all policy levers are in play.
Are you disappointed with the fact that the disinvestment targets are nowhere close to being met?
Well, disinvestment is a slow process, and I think the Ministry of Disinvestment is doing its best to, get this thing back on track. And I'm hopeful and confident that, over the next few months, we will do.
Could you explain to us why there has been this incredible delay? Because
that you'd have to talk to the person in charge of disinvestment. I don't deal directly with disinvestment.
But I'm sure the Finance Ministry is looking at it very, very closely, because it's an important part of the revenue side of your, profit and loss account. So
the timing of these things, is very much determined by, has to take into account all the constraints that are on the disinvestment process. So I think we will see. I am hopeful that going forward we will see more disinvestment.
Do you think that the government will be able to meet its this disinvestment target for this fiscal?
I think the government has committed to meeting its fiscal deficit target, and and disinvestment will contribute to that as well.
Mr. Subramanian, contribute, but will they meet the disinvestment target? Because if it doesn't come through disinvestment, how else are you going to be able to raise the money?
As I said, in this, remember, there's disinvestment, there's tax, there's expenditure. Everything comes into play, and you can't exclusively rely on one instrument over another.
Okay, how do you see how India looks at infrastructure expenditure evolving in the years to come? I'm not asking you a question specific to this budget, but I'm just curious as to what kind of role the government will play in building out infrastructure. Conventional wisdom says it's best that government spends its money in doing that and gets out of the business of doing business. Is this government going to actually look to meeting that conventional wisdom criteria?
Yeah, that's very much the intention. Remember that in the mid-year economic analysis that we tabled to Parliament, what we said was that the climate for private investment is, for a number of historical reasons, is not as strong as it should be, and therefore the public sector needs to step up investment, both because of those reasons and also because basic connectivity is a very important issue. It's something that the private sector will not do, and so I think there is a case for more public investment, which I think the government is going to embark upon. So I think one can expect to see the public investment being part of the engine of dynamism for the economy going forward.
And in the pursuance of that goal, Mr. Subramanian, do you expect that the government will actually reconsider its position on public sector entities like Air India? I don't mean to be specific about Air India. I'm using that as an illustration and say we shouldn't be in the business of flying people.
Yeah, there's a disinvestment agenda, and I think we're going to pursue that very vigorously.
Does that include getting out of the business of aviation or getting out of the business of so many other businesses that are best left to the private sector?
No, I think as a principle, I agree completely with you. Yeah,
but is there an action plan that you think is in the making?
Again, I don't craft disinvestment policy. That's something that
It isn't disinvestment policy in an isolation, right? It is part of how a government looks at its finances, looks at how it runs a country. So
yeah, I think the principle you're outlining is exactly right. Absolutely.
Do you see this government following that, though?
I think that this is part of what this government wants to do. Absolutely, yeah.
So in the months to come, and I'm not pinning this down to the budget in February or next year, in the months and years to come, we will see the government embark on getting out of the business of business.
These are things that are going to be discussed in the context of the budget and thereafter. So, but the principle, I think, is accepted, yeah.
Okay. We're in the middle of corporate earnings season. Consumption demand is not looking good. You'll see that in the volume growth figures announced by big companies like Hindustan Unilever, etc. When do you see a pickup in both private investment, which is critical, and consumption demand, which is also critical to the health of India?
Remember, consumption demand, I think, is slowly going to start picking up because because of oil prices having come down. Consumers, to the extent that we have passed down some of the increases, have more money in their pockets, and therefore, I do see consumption demand picking up. I see the fact that inflation having come down and easing of monetary policy also providing a boost to consumption. Private investment is the big challenge, and as I said, it's because of a number of reasons that have come together, because especially private investment in infrastructure, we have this overhang of distressed assets hanging over the system that needs to be cleaned up. We need to find, we need to fix the regulatory side and the input supply side, So as we get coal production up, gas production up, that should be a part of that as well. So a combination of, fixing the regulatory and the input supply side, boosting public investment so that, that will be complementary with private investment, dealing with, the weak credit in the banking system and the overhang of distressed assets. I think these are all have to be done to get private investment, going again, and that's going to be something.
How far away is that?
It's very difficult to predict. That's very difficult to predict.
But at least a year or two, you'd say.
See, I think growth is now should be on an upward trend. So 5.5 this year, it should go up next year, and keep consistently going up as long as we, the government keeps doing the reform.
If private sector investment doesn't come through for the next fiscal, is the government going to step in, or is its long-term commitment to fiscal responsibility going to mean that we're going to continue to see a tightened belt?
Yes, so those are decisions we're going to take in the context of the budget. I think the need for public investment is clear, and we will do that without compromising our, commitment to fiscal discipline. And how we do that.
So what gets cut then?
You have to wait.
Or what gets taxed more?
You have to wait for the budget.
There are only two ways to do this.
You have to wait for the budget for these things to be decided.
Are you saying, should we expect more public expenditure and infrastructure in the coming fiscal?
I think the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister have said that very clearly, that we need to increase public investment in the Indian economy going forward.
Is this a part of a relook at taxes and tax incentives to corporate India? Because where else are you going to get the revenue from to fund this? We've done a myriad different kinds of infrastructure funds in this country, and they haven't all necessarily developed, much better than any of us do. So I'm just curious as to what new approach could come through where you will have the money, the resources, and the success to make it work.
Again, as I said, these are exactly the decisions we're grappling with, in the coming months, and you will see them, in the budget.
Are you in favor of a big overhaul of India's tax code? Not specific to this budget. I'm talking about the medium term.
Tax policy is something that we are in the process of discussing, and that's something that, we have to have a tax environment that's favorable for investment, and that objective we'll have to pursue in some way or the other in the budget.
Because the most curious thing I've noticed with Indian budgets is, a month before that, you have these 40-page documents that go in from chambers of commerce asking for all kinds of tax cuts and incentives, and I've never understood this annual exercise of please give me a sop. So I'm just curious, do you think we will see a rewrite of the tax code that will maybe offer lower rates but do away with incentives? Which is probably, I think, what the first DTC draft looked like or attempted to do.
I think the principle that we should have a wide base and lower rates. Again, it's a kind of principle that everyone embraces and we work towards. But exact details on direct taxes, we'll have to wait for the budget. Yeah?
I suppose I'm now treading into cannot talk about any of this because it's in budget territory.
Absolutely.
Okay, so then let me end by asking you a more general question, not connected to the budget. Top 5 priorities for the Indian economy in 2015.
No, I think, whenever people ask me for lists, I shy away from them because...
Okay, forget the top 5, just the top priorities.
No, I think the challenges, we've got the macroeconomic stability. I think the time has come to do everything we can to revive investment so that we can get durable growth and create employment opportunities. I think that's what we need. That's the top priority.
All right, we leave it there, Mr. Subramanian.
Okay,
appreciate you finding the time.
Thanks.